We have looked at the game makers and designers of Chrono Trigger, but where does this game stand in the pantheon of gaming classics, and how has its variations and collectability made this game a fan favorite for almost 15 years? Retroware TV will take a deeper look into the Squaresoft classic Chrono Trigger. At the time of Chrono Trigger's release in 1995, the only non-Final Fantasy release in the US was Secret of Mana, and while a fantastic game, it was not an RPG in the sense of utilizing the common element of turn-based battles. Game releases by Square in the late 80s and early 90s were few and far between, while the Japanese market enjoyed many more titles available for their Super Famicoms, only a select few were released here. This was most likely due to the extensive regionalization and translation work that was required of text-heavy Squaresoft games. This was always an expensive endeavor, and considering RPGs were not big sellers prior to Final Fantasy VII, it wasn't the most profitable endeavor to undertake such heavy production budgets in an effort to support a limited release of a game that at the time was part of a genre considered to be too Japanese-centric for American audiences. Chrono Trigger, however, was a bestseller in the US. At the time, it was considered to be the greatest Square game ever released, and it sold quite well on the reputation garnered by the successes of the Final Fantasy series. For the classic gaming collectors, Chrono Trigger has become such a hot commodity that complete in-box sets, which include both maps and all the inserts, can fetch well over $150 on eBay. I know this because I sold my copy a couple years ago, something I've started to regret recently. At least I still have the pictures, right? The high price of this game, even loose as just the cartridge, is actually overinflated because Chrono Trigger is not a rare game. In fact, it was released in high quantities at the time of release. The Super Famicom version of the game is more readily available and cheaper to find complete in box. For some Japanese gamers eager to pick up the cartridge early in its release, were also lucky enough to get their hands on some collectible Prism cards that will fetch a high price if they can be found in the wild. Along with the official Japanese release, there was also a sampler ROM cartridge given out to reviewers and retailers in an effort to garner some interest in the game during its pre-release beta phase. Over the years, this ROM cart has been ripped and played, and suffice it to say, there are many slight differences as well as fundamental design pitfalls that don't allow you to progress normally throughout the game. Even earlier incarnations of Chrono Trigger's elements were also shown at the 1994 V-Jump Festival in Japan, prior to the release. Finding the ROM cart for sale is a bit more difficult, but it is a great item for true fans of Chrono Trigger. Upon working on this review, I also came across an incredible resource, updated constantly, that can shed light on this, as well as other elements of this game's history and development. ChronoCompendium.com. It is truly a fan's oasis to discuss and learn more about this game and its legacy. Along with the standard Super Famicom and Super Nintendo releases, there were also a few titles released on the Japanese-only Satellaview system. This was an add-on unit to the Super Famicom in Japan that allowed for game downloads via dial-up connection to a satellite server, thus the name Satellaview. The system never made it out of Japan and was not too successful there itself due to the price, limited content, and the small window of times throughout the day when downloads were actually available. The downloadable games on the Satellaview all had the prefix BS. This stood for Broadcast Satellaview, and most available content involved minigames and minimal content additions to existing titles and game franchises. For Chrono Trigger, Square released Jet Bike Special, which was a mini racing game featuring the jet bike sequence that takes place in 2300 AD. More interesting was a text-based graphical sequel to Chrono Trigger called Radical Dreamers. This is a little-known semi-sequel that was released a year after Chrono Trigger and helped tie up loose ends in the original game, while introducing new characters. The last two offerings in the BS library were the Chrono Trigger Character Library and the Chrono Trigger Music Library. Both of these small additions were eventually included in the PlayStation version of Chrono Trigger, released in Japan and in the US under the Final Fantasy Chronicles title. The PlayStation version included some really amazing anime cutscenes, and while it was a nice way to play the game, certain original color palettes and resolution lacked when translated to the new version. Along with those anime video sequences added for the PlayStation release, another lesser-known project was a 16-minute anime short film featuring characters and locations from the game itself. Along with the game footage preview, it was also shown at the V-Jump Festival as a promotional item for the upcoming release of the game. This anime short film poked fun at some of the game's themes and began with the preparation of the Millennial Fair showcase at the beginning of Chrono Trigger's story. It also featured game music utilized well throughout the entire anime short. Up until recently, a fan conversion project started, transforming the original Chrono Trigger into a fully realized 3D game. Chrono Trigger Resurrection was the title, and this talented group of fans really flexed their talents before they were shut down by Square a couple years back. While an understandable cease and desist order, it is truly a shame that some people didn't get the chance to play this labor of love. Simply by looking at images from the game in progress, the passion and effort taken to convert all aspects of the original locations and artwork into a fully realized three-dimensional landscape can easily be seen. Eventually, a true sequel was released for the PlayStation called Chrono Cross. Chrono Cross followed up where Radical Dreamers left off and helped flesh out that story by specifically utilizing some of the same characters. While Chrono Cross has received glowing reviews over the years, and it managed to hold true to some of the gameplay elements and settings that Chrono Trigger had originated, many fans of the original could never latch on to the sequel because of its new cast of characters. It goes without saying that the passion that Chrono Trigger fans have for the story and the game is an intense and well-deserved admiration. From the collectible rarities and the side stories hidden from most audiences, this game will live on for years to come. Stay tuned for the conclusion of Retroware TV's look at Chrono Trigger as we delve into the gameplay elements that made this role-playing game such an unforgettable classic.